Welcome back to the Embodied Faith podcast with Jeff and Sid Holsclaw today. And for a couple episodes in this season, season 4, we're going to be talking about some core concepts within what we're calling embodied faith. We're actually going to spend a couple episodes just talking about what is embodied faith. But first, today, we're going to be talking about the 3 attachment questions that will shape your life. This is Embodied Faith, which is seeking a neuroscience informed spiritual formation, brought to you by Grassroots Christianity, which seeks to grow faith for everyday people. All right. So this is the episode where Sid pretty much flies the plane. And I am the color she's like the play-by-play, and I'm the color commentator. Usually it's the other way around, where sometimes I'm kind of the producer leading the way. So I'm going to give it to you, Sid.
Yeah. So we want to just talk about these 3 core questions that are embodied for us. The answers to these questions are embodied in a very implicit way in our nervous systems. And I want to talk about how those questions get there, what they are, and how the answers to those questions end up shaping and forming all of our behaviors, our thoughts, and our experiences throughout our lives. So it starts with we're going to sort of talk about the 1, 2, 3 of attachment. And this is Jeff's 1, 2, 3, by the way. He's not talking about it, but that doesn't mean he wasn't involved in coming up with it. So the 1, 2, 3 of attachment starts with, we all have this one fundamental desire, and that is to have joyful connections with God and with one another. And so we've talked in another episode about joy and how joy is so important and what joy is, and joy being foundational in the way that we have a sense of identity and a sense of self. And so those joyful connections are meant to be shaped and formed during our early years with our caregivers. And we can talk more about that in a minute, but I'm just doing an overview here. Depending on what kind of foundation of joy and how strong that foundation is in our early years, we end up growing in 2 different dimensions. And one of those dimensions is intimacy. And we'll just think of intimacy as the capacity to be closely related, in close relationship with other people. And then the other dimension is independence. And independence is that capacity to be able to go out into the world and to have what it takes to do things and to get things done, and sort of that confidence to explore and to engage. So depending on how we grow in that intimacy and independence, well, as we grow in intimacy or independence or both, we're designed to grow in both, we will end up running into ruptures in our relationships or in our ability to move about in the world. And through a process of relational repair, and so through rupture and repair, we end up having these 3 core questions that become answered for us depending on how consistent our processes of rupture and repair are. So just again, 1, desire for joyful connection, 2, dimensions of intimacy and independence, which leads to rupture and repair, which then leads to these 3 questions. And the 3 core questions, the first one that we gain developmentally is about other people. And that question is, are other people available to me? So are they available in a consistent way? We're designed to have a yes answer to that. But depending on how those processes of rupture and repair happen for us, sometimes we wind up with a maybe. Maybe people are available to me. Maybe they're not. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're not. Other times we end up with a no answer. Nope, people are not available. I am pretty much on my own. So that's the first core question that shapes you other people, that will largely go with us in an embodied kind of way throughout the rest of our life. The second core question is, will this current distress that I'm living in or experiencing, will this distress be alleviated? And that's all about that sort of like, when I'm hungry, will I be fed? When my diaper is wet, will I be changed? That sort of, will this distress be alleviated? And this ends up shaping how we view the world, how we interact and engage with the world, what we expect from the world, whether that stress will be alleviated or not. And then the third core question that we end up asking throughout the rest of our lives is, do I have agency to do good or to make things happen in a way that will actually bless and flourish the world around me. So how do I get to use my agency? Do I have agency, and can I use it for good? So the three questions again: are people available, which forms our view of others? Will this distress be alleviated, which shapes the way that we interact with the world? And then the third question is, can I use my agency for good, which is that sense of self? So those are the three core questions that we end up asking. And again, those come from our processes of rupture and repair as we are growing in intimacy and independence based on our foundation of joy. I guess I did that upside down. If it's a foundation, it's at the bottom. So joy at the bottom, the two dimensions, the three questions. And then those three questions are living in our nervous systems in an embodied way. That's based on the answers that we come up with for those three questions. That helps our nervous system detect what is dangerous, what is a threat, how can I connect? Do I prioritize connection more often than protection? All of that is embodied within us based on the answers we come up with for those questions.
Now, when you say based on the answers that we come up with, are you talking about like these where we're consciously asking ourselves every time we go into a new situation, we go to a new school, we get a new job, we're constantly asking ourselves, are others available? Will this distress be alleviated?
Well, that would be nice.
Do I have agency?
That would be great if we were asking those questions consciously, but we're actually not. I mean, those questions are being asked on a nervous system kind of level. And so they're usually below our consciousness. We're not consciously asking, are other people available? We're just living as if they either sometimes are, they're not, or they are. So depending on how we've learned to answer that question in our early years, that implicit or that unconscious response is just what we live from.
So it's an implicit kind of questions that have already been implicitly answered based on our attachment history, our attachment figures, and they can be answered slightly different in different contexts
and with different people.
And with different people. So that first one, are others available? Oftentimes we think that there's just two possible answers to that, but there's actually three possible answers. Could you talk about that one with this, which again is implicitly, and talk maybe about like the childhood history or something behind how these get answered?
Of course.
Or were you not prepared to do that?
No, I can definitely do that. So the answer of yes is obviously going to come from a secure attachment, a place of where your caregivers are available to you on an ongoing basis. There's a predictability to their availability. They're present. And they're not only available for your physical needs, but they're also available for your emotional needs. They're there for you relationally. So that availability of your caregivers, that consistent availability, creates a yes, a resounding yes. Other people are going to be available. So that's one way to answer the question. The sometimes,
and, well, just to add that, like the attachment literature would talk about attuned caregivers or sensitive caregivers, which is different than
a good enough caregiver.
The good enough care, which is different. Just to make the clarification, it's not necessarily affectionate. Certainly, it involves being affectionate to your child, that you have a parent who gives like affection. Of course, we talk about joy and all those things, but it's not just affection as if positive affection will make it, but it's sensitivity. It's being able to read signals, being attuned to the cries and the concerns, and then understanding what course of action is needed in that particular moment. So it's actually very contextual, flexible responses, so that's why the words sensitive and or attunement are used, and certainly affectionate is part of that process.
Great.
Okay.
Yes.
So then
that's the yes. The maybe
yes.
comes from an inconsistent care environment. So for example, you might have a caregiver who sometimes really wants to engage with you and is very present to you and is totally available. But then at other times, your caregiver is dealing with their own stuff, their own emotions or their own busy life, and they just don't have time for you or don't have space for you, don't have energy for you. So they're not even trying to attune to you. So there's just this unavailability. And so sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not. And then sometimes they might interrupt you when you're perfectly content to be doing what you're doing, but then your caregiver wants to engage with you. So they come and interrupt your independent play and sort of insist that you play with them. And so that's the language around that is intrusive. So intrusive, like bids for attention from your caregiver. And so it goes both ways. Like sometimes your caregiver is available to you. Sometimes your caregiver wants to engage with you when you don't want to engage. But that inconsistency of the sometimes available, sometimes not, is what causes a maybe answer to that question of are others available.
And then what would the no answer? Where
The
would that
no
come
would
from?
be that, maybe your caregiver is providing all of your material needs, like all your physical needs, but they're not necessarily engaging with you in a way that is attuned or relational. And so there's this sense of like, this caregiver is not available to me as a whole person, or there are parts of me that this caregiver cannot be available to. And so the no is more like, okay, I might have the things that I need, like I might be taken care of in like a very basic kind of way, but my caregivers are not available for my social or my emotional or my like my needs that go beyond just, food and clothing and shelter.
Right. And sometimes that's called like a rejecting or abandoning kind of situation. So that is the first one. Oops. That is kind of the first core question, the default attachment question, implicit, that can get answered. And when that answered is a yes for the first one, are others available, then that creates a situation in which you believe you create hope that distress in the world will be alleviated. You have this positive expectation that ruptures will be repaired. But when you get into the maybe or the no, then that becomes more problematic.
Right, because the rupture, the distress might be alleviated and it might not. It's sort of that maybe from the are others available carries over into a maybe the distress will be alleviated and maybe it won't. And maybe it will be alleviated if somebody else is available to me. But if nobody else is available right now, this distress might not be alleviated. And so it turns into that sort of anxiety over, I don't know if this distress is going to be alleviated or not. I don't really know what's going to happen. And so that's where, this is often, it's a type of anxious attachment. In the literature, it's called preoccupied or distracted, just because there is sort of this sense of like, well, that sometimes they've been available in the past, sometimes they haven't. And there's this just anxiety. I'm not quite sure. And then the no would be, well, there is no history of distress being alleviated for me emotionally, relationally, of any kind, unless I just deal with it myself, which is that no, other people are not available. So this distress will only be alleviated if I do something about it, if I deal with it.
So, and this idea
that's
of
the avoidant or dismissive.
And that's where the idea of an insecure attachment comes from, is that you have an insecurity, you feel insecure in the world and in your relationships because you're not sure whether this distress will be alleviated, which is different than what a secure attachment would be. Is not that you never have distress. And that's where I think sometimes people get a little confused. It's not like you live without distress. It's actually you live with the hope and the expectation even that this distress will be alleviated. And then, of course, that connects to then the third default question, which is, well, how does this distress become alleviated? Partly it's answered by whether or not people are available. Partly it's answered by how much and in what way do I use my agency? So can you explain that last kind of question? Do I have agency in the world?
Yeah. So, when you're securely attached and your answer is yes, people are available and yes, this distress will be alleviated, well, then you can go ahead and use your agency for good. You can go and you can be generous, you can be hospitable, you can go and take care of other people in a way that is actually really helpful for them and still keeps you healthy and strong. You can sort of go about in the world and explore, and you can make a difference and you can make an impact because you have that security of knowing that distress will be alleviated and people are available for you. But if it's a maybe, then you're going to end up using your agency largely just to connect with other people, to stay connected with other people so that so that distress will be alleviated and so that people will be available for you. So most of your agency is going to be used and devoted toward developing intimacy and connection with other people. So it's like your agency is not necessarily used for the good of the world or for the good of other people as much as it's used for your own feeling of closeness and feeling of connection, so that you'll know your needs are going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. And so that's the maybe sort of place. And then the agency for the person who feels like people are not available and things are only going to be alleviated if I take care of it, they're largely going to use their agency to remain independent, to remain sort of disconnected from the messiness of other people's relationships, because the only way that they're going to actually the way they're going to prioritize their agency is to sort of stay distant or disconnected so that they'll be able to take care of their own distress. Because they assume that nobody's going to be available anyway. So rather than using their agency on behalf of others, they'll use their agency to sort of preserve their own independence.
Right. And so how these 3 questions, or the 3 defaults, as we talk about in our attachment cohort, attaching to God cohort, like these really affect and shape the implicit lives, how we experience relationships, how we view the behavior of other people, and how we interpret it, how we filter our own emotions or filter out our emotions, right? So the other thing too that just gets a little confusing for people is in the attachment literature, especially the romantic attachment, adult relationships literature will talk about anxious attachment, and then the contrast with being avoidant attachment. And it's a little confusing because all the research shows that actually avoidant people are anxious. They've just managed to hide their anxiety, their relational,
Even
and
from themselves,
even
right?
from themselves. And so they'll do so consciously, they won't seem to be anxious. They won't report that they're anxious, but they'll put like body monitors and check their heart rates and like how tense their muscles are and other things. And they'll show that like when they're primed or prompted in certain attachment kind of ways with questions or situations, or showing pictures, their body will become anxious and tense. And so that's a little bit confusing with the language. Is all those who have insecure attachment, who kind of have maybes or no's when it comes to these questions, have some sort of level of anxiety. It's just whether it shows or not.
And whether you call it anxiety or not.
Yeah, right. Or stress or things like that. So these are the 3. We just wanted to kind of create just a quick episode just to kind of talk a little bit about this. Sometimes they're called the internal working models for attachment theory. There's a lot more that we talk about this in our Attaching to God cohort, which is actually right now, as far as this recording is, our first cohort is ongoing, but you can in the show notes see the wait list for our next one, which will probably be sometime in the summer of 2023. But also, Sid, you're doing a rooted cohort. So what is that?
Yeah. So the rooted cohort is especially helpful for managing that anxiety or handling that anxiety that's sort of going on under the surface all the time. And so the people who have a maybe answer will probably feel that more readily. But people who have the no answer are also dealing with that. And what it is the rooted course is really helping it's dealing with embodiment. How do I learn to regulate my nervous system, and how do I learn to sort of be feeling safe, feeling less anxious, or feeling more grounded in my body? And how does that sort of carry over into life with God as well? And so that is a 6-week course as well. And we'll be starting, our first meeting will be on the last Tuesday in May 30th, but there's a little bit of pre-work before that. So you can sign up for that before May
26 is what we decided.
Yeah, sign up for that before May 26th.
The last Friday of May.
And that's just a great way to start to learn what is going on in my nervous system, and how can I sort of almost trick my body into feeling safe when it doesn't.
So if you want to be sure to be connected to these kind of core concept episodes that we're going to be putting out over the next couple of weeks, be sure to subscribe on YouTube if you're watching there. Follow us on our podcast if you're a podcast listener, but then especially also you can follow these on my new Embodied Faith Substack. And then you can also, we are seeking to kind of raise some support. So if you want to partner with us to kind of pay for some of these, the bills to run all these things, please do that. Those links will be in the show notes. We would really appreciate it, and it'll help us to get more of these episodes
and
out
you can
quicker.
Also see what we're able to, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, this would be super helpful for my church or for a retreat or something like that, you can just go to embodiedfaith.life and you can see all the things that we're currently doing and up to.
Absolutely. Well, so I don't know what our next episode is, but thank you all for joining us, and we will all see you and talk to you soon.